From Social Prosperity Partners, this is Community Catalysts.
It was a very practical question in my mind, but once I delivered it, I realized, that probably didn't hit correctly.
Welcome to Community Catalysts. I'm Matt Lehrman. If you serve your community in any leadership role, you know that not all challenges arrive neatly packaged or at a convenient time. Some unfold in real time. Some involve relationships, expectations, and decisions that feel deeply personal. And some test not only what leaders do, but how they show up while the ground is still shifting beneath them. This podcast exists for those moments. It's a place to slow down and open up, to reflect honestly, and to learn from leaders who are navigating complexity while the stakes are still very real. My guest today is Matthew Johnson, Town Manager of Jamestown, North Carolina. Jamestown is a small but deeply rooted community just southwest of Greensboro, close enough to feel the pressures of regional growth, but intentional about preserving its independent small-town character. Shaped by history and close relationships, it's also navigating heightened public expectations and moments of transition that place extraordinary demands on local leadership. Today, I'm looking forward to exploring Matthew's experience as a city manager, how professionalism shows up when leadership becomes personal, how change is navigated in close-knit communities, and how trust between staff leadership and elected officials is built, tested, and worked through. Matthew Johnson, welcome to Community Catalysts.
Thanks, Matt. I'm glad to be here.
Glad to have you here. I'm going to call you Matthew if you don't mind. I know you sometimes go by Matt, but just to avoid the confusion of who's who here, all right?
That's perfect.
So, Matthew, as we prepared for this interview, you told me that the history of Jamestown runs deeper than most people realize. So could we just start there? Tell me a bit about that history and how it remains meaningful today.
So the area was settled in the mid-1700s, around 1752. There was some history of people settling in the area just prior to the Revolutionary War. This area was well known for some Revolutionary War battles. The area was settled by Quaker settlers that moved out of Pennsylvania, moved down to this area, started a grist mill, a tannery, and there was a large rifle making school in our area. So a lot of long rifle making going on in that area. The town itself was incorporated in 1947, and it's a bedroom community for Greensboro and High Point, and to some extent Winston-Salem. Its main growth occurred in probably the 1970s, 1980s. A little bit of limited growth in the mid-90s, and then it kind of was quiet. It's been quiet for a little while up until recently. We are getting a lot of growth pressure as Greensboro is continuing to expand, and Guilford County in its own right is continuing to expand. A lot of economic development going on in our area related to growth with our airport and things around this area.
So if you were giving us a driving tour through Jamestown right now, what will you show us? What would we want to know about Jamestown?
There's a lot of history here. One of the things that I would show you, there's an older cotton mill. That cotton mill originally was a place where they made munitions and things during right after the Civil War. It became a textile plant, and it's fallen into disrepair, but it is a gem. It is something that I think reflects a lot of the history of the area, a lot of blue-collar workers, folks that really put their heart and soul into the community and built it from there. I would also show you our library. It was the original school in the area. It's the Old School Association, continues to run a local library there. I would show you our school systems. We're well known for having a really great school system in our area. And I would show you the community where people live, because that's 90% of what makes up our town are residential houses.
Tell me a little bit about your history in Jamestown. As you've been city manager for how long? And I know that you held positions in Jamestown long before you were city manager.
Yes, I started as town manager in 2021. I started with the town in 2006. I worked for the city of Greensboro for 5 years in different capacities there. And when this opportunity came up in 2006, one of my coworkers said, "Hey, this would be a great opportunity for you," because I was a planner. And he said, "You'll be able to go to a small town. You'll get a lot of exposure to all types of different things." And he was right. I came in 2006 as the town's first planner. Just over the years have grown into different roles there as assistant manager for a little while, and then now town manager. And it's been a great trajectory for me. It's been a lot of good partnerships that have arisen out of this. I've got a lot of friends. I know a lot about the folks that live in town, or know a lot of folks, and it feels like home to me.
What do you know as a town planner that helps you in your job as a town manager?
Um, I think that there's a lot of similarities between the planning profession and the managing profession. It's dealing with people, being able to have a good way to communicate with folks, to learn what they want to do, and to help them. I see us as a conduit in local government. We help people achieve the things that they want to achieve, whether that means the developer who is trying to develop something, or the community who is maybe saying that they don't want that development. I think we bring them together as partners and have a conversation around what works and what doesn't work. And hopefully we come out with solutions that are at least livable for most.
So, look, this is the podcast where we invite people to kind of, go deep and talk about hard-won experience. Is there an experience that you actually would be willing to talk about, where you could kind of talk us through what was the challenge, and what was that thing that in retrospect you say was a mistake?
Yes, I can tell you 100%. So very early on in my career, when I first came there, they updated the comprehensive plan. The comprehensive plan that they had that was in place had been done in probably the early 60s. This was in 2007, 6, 7. So that was vastly different. What the community was looking for was vastly different than what they had grown from. So we did the comprehensive plan. We came up with all of the conversations of the community, all the answers, and we put it all on paper and adopted it and moved forward. And the very first time it was really tested was in the central business district area. There was a restaurant with a drive-through that wanted to come, and I won't say their name, but they ended up coming in, and they talked to us about developing it on a piece of property directly across the street from the elementary school. And there were a tremendous number of participants that came out that were very concerned. Very callously, I kind of mentioned, it was like, it felt like they were attacking me personally, because sometimes they would say things to me like, "Hey, you're the new guy. You're trying to make us into something that we don't want to be. We don't want corporate restaurants with drive-throughs in our downtown." And I was like, it fits the comprehensive plan, which is what the people who showed up told us that they wanted. And I made the comment, in front of a group of about 100 people. So, where were you when we were doing this comprehensive plan? Now you're all out here. And I was like, that was a mistake. And that was being young and naive. And, I just didn't realize what I had done until
Let's focus on that for just a
Sure.
moment. Did you know in the moment that it was a mistake to say that?
Yes, because I heard the groans from the audience. They just kind of was like, "Oh," and I was like, "Oh, well, maybe I've said the wrong thing."
But let's be candid. A lot of people who are in local government who hear from neighbors in this kind of an instance are thinking, where were you when we did this? We went through the process here. We did everything that was required of us and more to get input. How is it now that you're coming here? So the sense of this was probably not, it wasn't a mean or malicious thing, right? It was
Right.
it was a practical question.
Trickle question in my mind, but once I delivered it, I realized that probably didn't hit correctly.
After the groan, what happened?
The council went on at the time to sort of turn that request down. They actually went back and rezoned the area to prevent that from happening.
But wait, I'm sorry, but let me make sure. In the moment you say these words, the audience groans. Did they get even angrier as a result?
I think that they were more frustrated. That was part of my, sort of introduction to the rezoning request. And I was, a bit frustrated. There were people that were, as you were walking into the meeting, they were basically chastising us for even considering this. And I think there's a lot of confusion just in local government everywhere, that people don't understand the processes of how things work. We have a responsibility to carry a request forward.
Yeah. So the point is that from the audience's point of view, from those neighbors' point of view, this kind of reinforces the idea that government has its own way of operating, but it
Yes.
doesn't really listen and it's not really responsive. And to be told, you're too late, where are you? It doesn't really speak to the moment.
No, that was a mistake.
Yeah. Okay. When we were preparing for today, you shared something with me that I think maybe comes directly out of this. You described trust as the true infrastructure of local government. Let me ask you just to elaborate on that. What does that specifically mean for you? And am I right in connecting, like, this might have been an early experience that led you to this conclusion?
That's the earliest experience that sort of led me to that. I've started to grow over time, and that's one of the things that I think right now I'm focusing on. And we've got something going. We've had something going on here in the turnover on our council. Recent election, we out of the 5, we lost 3 great ladies who worked for a long time, and not only on different boards and things. We have one that was a town clerk for 21 years prior to her being on council. So she had a lot of institutional knowledge.
Wow.
And we had a mayor that was on the planning board and was a CPA, is a CPA, and worked very hard as a council member and a mayor. And then we had another lady who had been on for 8 years and is a big part of our community as well. So we lost a lot of that group that we've been through a lot of stuff together in the past, I don't know, 3 to 5 years, with a large development that's coming to our community. It's about a 1,400 housing unit, 467 acre development.
Wow.
It will essentially double the size of our community. So it's a big deal. And
It'll
so we
double
worked
it in
really hard on it.
population?
Yes, population will probably double.
Wow.
And yeah, so it's a big deal for all of us. It was a lot of work. A lot of negotiation went into that. But I learned that being able to have a relationship with people, I think it's easier for people to fuss at people that they don't really know, or they're just that person over there. That's the town. That's not somebody that's a human being. And so I've worked really hard to build relationships amongst different people in the community, especially with our elected officials and our appointees on the planning board, Parks and Recreation Committee, business owners, those types of things, to let them know that we're human beings and we want the best for our community. We may have differences of opinion on what that looks like, but to build trust, we have to have a relationship first. And once you have trust, you can give a little bit of grace to folks. They go, well, Matt's not trying to, tear everything down. I mean, I've spent basically 20 years in this community trying to make it the best that I could be. I saw something really not too long ago, the Athenian Oath. It says basically, I want to leave this better than I found it. And so that's what I'm trying to do. I'm getting a little bit long in the tooth. Been in local government for 25 years. And so I want to leave a legacy that is better than it was than when I got there.
Let's talk about the nature of trust. Is trust, do you think, is it trust in individuals? Is it trust in the system of government? What is the actual trust that you're trying to build here?
I think it starts with the individual. I think if you can establish a relationship and some rapport, and then you can move to trust. And once you move to trust in the individual, you can see trust in the organization. And that's my approach. And do that through communication. I try to make sure that we're having good conversations and being open-minded and open to hearing from everybody.
So how does the notion of trust correspond to this big housing development that you're talking about here? What are the things that trust either helps make happen, or that lack of trust is kind of friction in the process? Can I ask you to be candid and talk about that?
When this happened, it corresponded almost exactly with the start of COVID. which made it much more difficult and much more difficult to build the partnerships and the relationships and build the trust that you needed, because you couldn't do this in a face-to-face kind of situation. It's a massive change for the community. This development's big. It's a national builder, the nation's largest builder. So there's a lot of opinions that go with that. And then with the beginning of COVID and everything kind of, shuttered, and we could not meet with people as easily, we had about a month between the introduction of this particular development, everything just stopped. So in that period of time, we worked really hard to meet with people, but everybody sort of went online. And as soon as people went online and into social media, it grew a life of its own. There was not good information being shared. There was misinformation or sometimes disinformation that was being shared. And those things move very quickly. And because it's a big change, it's a big change for the community. It was a fairly wooded farm, and 467 acres is a big chunk of land, and it's hard for most people to sort of wrap their brain around what that looks like. It was really difficult to build that relationship and build that trust. So we had to work extra hard.
But especially in the early days of COVID, when, so much stress was going on, even in the best of times, even without COVID, taking issues into social media is not the place you necessarily go to build trust.
It is not. So human nature is that we sort of drawn to the sensational things or the negative things, and people would reshare the negative things that
negative stuff spreads like wildflower.
Absolutely.
Like wildfire.
Well, wildfire, it goes all over the place. And we were having a really difficult time because we're a small staff, and having an online conversation was very difficult for us. There were specific narratives that were being pushed, that were trying to squash the development, understandably. Somebody, on our staff once said, like, this is difficult for us too. This creates a tremendous amount of work for a small group of people. And it's not like we're being paid per capita. So it's not like we're asking for it to grow like this, but we are responsible for hearing these requests when they come in and pushing them through the system. In this particular development, we ended up, because of COVID, sort of putting it on pause till we could sort of figure out what was going on. We ended up partnering with an attorney, local land use attorney, he's probably one of the best in the state, and working with the developer to come up with a solution that worked for all. It didn't make everybody happy, certainly didn't make us perfectly happy, it didn't make them perfectly happy, but I think it was a much better outcome than just leaving it to another municipality that's nearby. They would not have looked at this the same way as Jamestown did.
You're saying that the development could have left Jamestown completely and become an opportunity for a neighboring community.
Yeah, what most people don't know is that the council at the time squelched two requests there were two different parties that were involved, but they both tried to take it to our General Assembly to have this taken out. We have extraterritorial jurisdiction over that area. So it was not in our corporate limits at the time. They tried to have it removed and placed in either the county's jurisdiction or a neighboring larger city. And the only reason I think that we were successful in thwarting those attempts is that our council was just so diligent in discussing that. They had trust and they had built rapport with our General Assembly delegation from Guilford County. And they said, look, we're working with them. Give us a little time to work with them. It may not be everything that they want. They want to move faster, but we're working with them. And they said, great, that's all we can ask for. And there's another municipality in Guilford County that took a different approach. And they unfortunately had it de-annexed, about 1,000 acres de-annexed from their jurisdiction, because the General Assembly was responsive to that request.
Matthew, when you look back at the situation, are there any lessons that you identify that aren't about how the development might have changed to meet the neighbors' concerns, but how you used social media or any other communications tools that you had that you learned from that were instrumental in helping elevate the level of trust that went into that decision making.
Because we're a small staff, and a lot of people wanted to have dialogue on social media, and that was particularly important during the COVID time. Um, eh, but it got to be very cumbersome for us because we couldn't answer all the questions that were coming in on social media. And then the answers to the questions that we did provide, were taken out of context and then pushed into a different direction. And I think we've always preferred to have face-to-face or at least telephone conversations, or at least we want to build rapport. We want to be able to see people and not just people behind the keyboard. And then I think that hindsight being 2020, it would be better if we had had an employee that was like a public information officer or a marketing person that could deal with those, and that was their sole purpose. But right now, we don't have that level of support in our organization. So we just we tried to push out information where we could. We ended up inviting people. We took about 2.5 years to get that project done through the rezoning process, and we ended up with a development agreement with the developer. And during that process, we invited the community, because things had lightened up then, where people could get together again. Invited them in for all types of different charrettes and opportunities for them to share their thoughts and feelings. I feel like we did a pretty good job of getting information from the public. I don't mean that we satisfied everybody. I don't think you can ever satisfy everybody. But I think we have a much better outcome. And I drove past it this morning. They are putting up the first houses there. It does look different than it did, 5-10 years ago. But everything is going to change. I'm glad that we had a chance, and I'm glad that our council had a chance to have some influence over that.
I can only imagine that undertaking that at the dawn of COVID and trying to not just build trust, but just to get basic information communicated and make people who lived in the community not just aware, but feel engaged in the process of making that big decision. That was a huge problem and a huge challenge. And I'm reminded your comment about, we would prefer to do things in person. In the first year of COVID, that was absolutely impossible. In the second year, it was just incredibly difficult. And I'm also reminded, I interviewed the public information officer of Riley County, Kansas, last year. And she talked about social media in much the way that you did. And she said, we'll still use social media to communicate out tornado warnings and other important notifications, but really there is no substitute for in-person connection. That's where real trust comes from. It sounds like you agree with that 100%.
150%. Yeah, that's really where it lies for us. And I think that, we talked a little bit earlier, but there was a shift in our community here recently where there was a petition to remove me from my seat that was circulated around. And that's difficult. It's difficult to watch that happen. But I think a lot of it is based on information that was spread on social media that wasn't correct. Despite our best attempts to reach out to the people who were spreading the misinformation to have a conversation, they didn't want to have that conversation. They didn't want to hear from us at all. And I think they didn't want to be convinced otherwise, that they wanted to feel like that what they were putting out there was truth. And a lot of it is based on public records requests that they had made, and they took information and formulated a narrative that they wanted to perpetuate.
Are you saying that they had already locked themselves into a narrative and a conclusion that was intended? They were not interested in a dialogue about it?
Correct. And that makes trust hard to earn. It really makes trust hard to earn, because you're not having a conversation. You can't sit down, and even if we disagree, and I've never had any problems with somebody who says, well, I just don't see it that way. Well, that is perfectly understandable, perfectly fine. But when and I've seen this happen across the nation. I think it's happened a lot in local government. People seek to destroy the other party. When they don't understand something, when they don't agree with them, they become the enemy, and they work really hard to tear that person down, or that group down, and the organization down. Because of the seat that I sit in, I'm seen as the head of the organization. So uh, people felt like they did not get the best deals specifically related to that development issue.
Hmm.
And, with things they didn't understand, didn't want to have a dialogue about, they sought to remove me from my seat, which is fine. That those things happen. One of the people that was involved in that has become one of our elected officials, and that is also fine. But I think we're making some inroads now, because the nature of the job is as an elected official and a staff person, particularly with a town city manager, you are forced to make a relationship. And we're making some headway. It's going a lot better because we are having these conversations. We are building trust. It's going to take some time, but I think that we're on the right track.
I want to contrast that to your comment earlier when you said that trust is the true infrastructure of local government. It sounds like what you're saying is that may be true, but it doesn't mean that it is sold once and locked in forever. That just like roads and just like water pipes and sewer pipes, they require maintenance and they occasionally fall apart.
Yeah, sometimes they break, and I think that I'm doing this through language. I've learned some techniques of trying to figure out ways to remain curious and ask questions when we talk to each other. I'm seeking first to understand where people are coming from. I think people really, really, really want to be heard. And I think that was one of the things that COVID made really difficult, is that people didn't feel like they were heard because we couldn't get together. Then coupled with the idea of somebody behind a keyboard writing something and then resharing it a bunch, things get lost. It's like the old telephone game where you whisper something in somebody's ear, and by the time it reaches the 30th person, it's completely different. The message gets lost and it gets twisted. But we're working on that right now through remaining curious, having conversations, just asking a bunch of questions, making sure that people know that we do care how they feel. And we may not be able to satisfy every desire, but we are working really hard. And the rezoning for that parcel where I made my first mistake many, many years ago is now up for rezoning again. So I feel like I'm bookending my career, so to speak, with this one particular property and a rezoning. But we're approaching it differently this time. We are working really hard to have our ears open and listen and talk to people, and within the bounds of the law. So everybody has a right to develop. And our responsibility is to listen and walk them through that.
So tell us specifically how you do that. I mean, this is a place where this can be really instructive for people who have this responsibility in their communities. What are some of the specific things that you're doing?
So when I have a conversation with somebody, and sometimes they'll come into the public meeting and they'll say something at the public comment. I write down their name and their address or whatever, and then I try to find a contact number for them. A lot of times I'll reach out, like I'll use our budget process this last year. Nobody came to any of the budget related workshops. And then at the very last meeting, the night that we were going to adopt, at the end of June, our fiscal year begins July 1. So right at the end of June, about 6 people came in and spoke, and they said things that were not 100% accurate, but it is how they felt. And it was based on information that they had gleaned from social media. So I jotted their name down and I called them up and I said, I'd love to have a conversation with you about how you feel about this and why. And, asking things like, help me understand what it is that that you're making your conversation about, what you're making these claims in public. Help me understand where you're getting that information. Talk to me about this and let me explain our side of the story. Of the 6 that spoke and that I reached out to, 1 actually agreed to meet. He didn't believe the things that I told him, but that's okay. But we did have a good conversation. It was very respectful. and just remaining curious. I'm becoming very curious. I'm listening more and just trying to get to the root of where they're getting their information and why they feel like they do. And if
Yeah.
I can give them an alternative to think about, and I'm gonna tell them, I'm not here to change your mind. I'm just giving you an alternative to think about. One of the claims that was made is that we had 30 employees and that we were asking for a budget that would support 40 employees. So social media lit up, said, "Oh, you're hiring 10 new people." That wasn't accurate. We had 36 full-time employees. I was asking for to fill 4 new positions. We're budgeting for 4 different positions. And once I had the conversation with the fellow that, he was like, "Well, I hear you, but I don't agree with that." And I was like, "That's fine." But I just having conversations is important for me.
It kind of sounds like what you're saying is that trust isn't a institutional currency. It's a personal currency, and that you have to have the relationships and the personal willingness as the town manager to actually look people in the eye and receive what they have to say and respond to it. And this is not a function of necessarily we're going to do 3 more outreach meetings or send another mailer or another email campaign to get people to respond to a survey.
We do all the things. So we had an issue. We were changing the way that we delivered our solid waste services a few years ago, and we had talked about it for probably 10 years. When I first came there, the way that they picked up trash was that they would pick it up twice a week in bags at the curb. People would place their bags at the curb. They didn't have cans. We had a tremendous problem with crows in town, or critters, things that would come and destroy the bags and scatter trash. And it was kind of, dirty. And about 50% of the community really wanted to move the cans, and 50% didn't want to change anything at all. And to the point where we had conversations with past council members. And I remember having this conversation, and one of them just kind of dug his heels in and he said, "Absolutely not. We're not going to change. This is the way we are. We've always been this way. We're going to do it that way." And I said, "Absolutely no problem." So this part of the transformation for me was absolutely no problem. Before I might have gotten defensive and said, "Let me explain to you why you're wrong." But I said, that's not a problem. The only thing that we'll need from you is support from a financial aspect. We're going to have to add, 2 more trucks and a whole crew of people to ride on the back of them to service it that way. Now, staff's not going to recommend that because that's the most expensive thing that we can think of doing. Yeah. So we had a conversation and we were able to get that implemented where we have automated pickup with cans, and it's a lot cleaner. People love it. It's a lot easier to get their trash to the street because they can roll it, especially for our elderly population. But just having that conversation, is important, and giving them all of the options, and pausing for a minute and reflecting and thinking about what I'm going to say before I say it. So that's been important for me.
Hey, Matthew, we live in divisive times. And as we've discussed today, and you've been very candid about this, it sounds like, you experience, you have, or you are experiencing that at not just a societal level, but at a personal one as well. And if you don't mind my asking, I want to just conclude by asking you, what keeps you doing this work, and how do you guard against becoming drained or disillusioned or even cynical?
All of those things are real. They're occupational hazards. For me, the thing that keeps me grounded is a couple things. Knowing that this is good work. This is information. These are things that our communities need. They need really good people in local government because we affect the change that really impacts everybody on a day-to-day basis. So the better that we can be, and the better that we can show up, the better their lives are. So I think that is important. It is good, important work. The thing that keeps me grounded as far as, being able to push off burnout and things like that, making sure that your well-being is taken care of. I'm not the best at that, but we have a farm, and I go out on the farm and work, do labor out on the farm, and that keeps me grounded and lets me burn off some of that energy. So that's how I do it. I know other people that do other things, but that's how I'm managing to cope.
Matthew Johnson, it's been great talking to you, and I thank you so much for your candor and for being open to this conversation. It was great talking to you.
It's been my pleasure to be with you. Thanks, Matt.
My thanks again to Matthew Johnson, Town Manager of Jamestown, North Carolina. Listening to Matthew, what stays with me is a sense of steadiness. His experience reminds us that trust isn't something communities either have or don't have. It's something leaders tend to, conversation by conversation, choice by choice, and even when circumstances are unsettled, the way leaders show up still matters. Matthew's reflections point toward a hopeful truth that professionalism, care, and clarity are not passive qualities. They are active commitments. When leaders remain grounded and intentional, even in uncertain moments, they create space for understanding, repair, and forward movement, often before outcomes are fully clear. If this conversation sparked an idea, raised a question, or left you wondering, I'd love to hear about it. You're welcome to call 602-688-2724 and leave a short message. Tell me what you're noticing or what you'd like to hear explored next. I listen to every message, and your reflections help shape future episodes. And if you'd be open to sharing hard-earned lessons from your own leadership journey, I invite you to apply to be a guest. You'll find the podcast guest link in the show notes. Your story may help another leader see their own work more clearly. Community Catalysts is edited by Nick Living the Dream Tantillo. Our executive producer is John Little. I'm Matt Lehrman of Social Prosperity Partners. Thanks for listening. We'll be back soon with another Community Catalyst.